Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, you're most welcome to the Youth Roundtable Edition 2025. My name is Masawi Ivan, and I'm privileged to be your host today. This particular afternoon, we look at issues pertaining the state of democracy in East Africa. And today, with me, we have a panel of ladies and gentlemen. Allow me introduce my panel today for you that is going to be sharing with us on the topic, the state of democracy. Which way forward? Starting from my extreme left is Mahad Kisuze Mugaya. We can now refer to him as a lawyer. He's a programs officer at Lex Amica from the mighty university that is Makerere University. You're most welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Have you been with us before?
No, it's my first time.
So I take this pleasure to officially welcome you to the Youth Roundtable, a space for young people, especially the fact that Lex Amica is involved in issues pertaining constitutionalism, governance and rule of law. This is the right space for young people. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much.
As you move closer to my right from Mr. Mahad, is my chairperson for the multiparty youth platform, a youth leader in these spaces of young people who are both in democratic spaces and political parties. Allow me welcome the Honorable Nanyonjo Lynnet, who is our guest today on the Youth Roundtable. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much.
Wow, it is a pleasure to have you here today. Closest to me on my left is Mr. Kule Ronald Mbinga, if I'm sorry. He's a social justice activist and a member of the Pan-African Federalist Youth. They recently celebrated 62 years of the African Union since 1963. I happen to have been invited and to have been part of the celebrations of the African Union. You're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My name is, like I said, Ronald Mbinga Kule, and I bring you greetings from the Pan-African Federalist movement. Only that I will amend a bit. I know we were celebrating the Africa Liberation Day, not necessarily for African Union. Like we believe that we need a more federal approach to unite Africa, and then, of course, obeying the rules of law and then democratic principles. Thank you.
I will start with you, Honorable Lynnet. Purposes of the show. When we look at the current spaces of democracy across the region, but also rule of law. A few weeks ago, we had a Ugandan activist, that is Agafat Haile, I think 6 days ago, being dumped at the border between Uganda and Tanzania. Similarly, Boniface Mwangi, who is a Kenyan and was captured with her, was also dumped at the Kenya border. These had gone to Tanzania to show solidarity with one of the opposition figures in Tanzania, that is Tundu Lissu, who is facing charges of treason in that country. When you come to Uganda, we still have political challengers like Dr. Kanokiza Besigye also facing charges related to treason and other related habits. When you go to Kenya, the former vice president, that is Gachagua, is also challenging the status quo. This very week on Monday, there was an opposition MP who belongs to one of the political parties who was captured. I think not captured, but I can say who was detained without trace by the family, and it was also said that the state in Kenya has started practices of kidnapping. Looking at the DRC situation, the situation in Southern Sudan, where we see there's still a lot of friction between Kira and Riek Machar, but also looking at the state in Rwanda, we see that East Africa as a region, we are still having issues of implementing democracy to the best of the pillars that democracy should speak about. As a leader in the region, and as someone, maybe if you were met in Geneva and asked to give what would be your thoughts about the current status of of how you would analyze the state of democracy in East Africa.
Thank you very much. My name is Nanyonjo Lynnet. I'm the chairperson of the multiparty platform, and I'm glad to be here. Well, if I am asked in Geneva, my answer would be totally different to what I would be answering now. Because in Geneva, I carry Africa on my head like a crown. Here, I speak about the problems of Africa, knowing that I am cleaning Africa in-house. So I think the state of democracy in Africa has long been deteriorating, but I have a positive and a negative answer towards that. I think as Africans, the concept of democracy is not something that is part of us. And we have tried so much to emulate the type of democracy that was introduced to us by our colonizers, which clearly we have seen that is failing us. At all fronts, it's failing us. Because even them that introduced democracy, it is coming back to bite their hand. So I think as Africa, the problem we have now is we are stuck in a system that we do not understand, but we so hardly want to prove that we are practicing it. And that is one of the problems that we have in East Africa right now with democracy. But also, the nature of leadership in East Africa, according to BTMI, it's a network, it's a transformative index system. It says 6 out of 10 countries in East Africa are under autocratic leadership. That shows you the nature of leadership in East Africa. Though we badly want to prove to the world that we are in a democracy, it is more an autocracy than a democracy. Well, indicators have shown over the time, and we have seen these things. And I think before we clamor so much to understand what is the state of democracy, we should first find out as East Africa, what does democracy mean to us? We should define a democracy that we understand as East Africans, other than defining democracy on a broader spectrum and wanting so hard to fit in that spectrum that is defined on the broader picture. After saying that, I want to say things do not look very rosy, because I've seen that Stella Nyanzi, one of the vocal people from Uganda, has been stopped from traveling back to Germany, where she was seeking asylum. And I know that Dr. Kano Chiza was extracted from Kenya to be brought back to Uganda. That is actually a bigger case scenario. For trial. What does that show you? Because according to the indicators, they say Kenya is highly effective in democracy. But what is Kenya doing? What does that show you? We have seen irregularities in the Kenyan elections over time. But then, before we start speaking, oh, why did Tanzania deport people from Uganda when they went to stand in solidarity with the opposition leader in Tanzania? When did Uganda stand in solidarity with Tanzania when they clamped when the broader European and the Western countries clamped taxes on them when they refused to act under the COVID guidelines? Then I think it's very hypocritical of us to choose certain things that we think interest us. If we want to stand as East Africa, we should stand as East Africa as a whole. Because today when you say, oh, because now the leader of opposition is feeling bad, Tanzanians will ask you, why do you feel more concerned about the leader of opposition in our country? Yet when our country was gagged and attacked over COVID restriction, which is a sovereign state is allowed to practice what it feels is good for their country. When we were clamped down with all of these things, where were you to speak about the East Africa and the unity that we have? So will Uganda tell you that over the time we have had irregularities in our elections? we can speak of the Kawempe North by-election, we can speak of very many irregularities. But over the time, where has Tanzania been? So when we talk about the question of democracy, it should not be sided on things that interest us. It should be our all-round. Because now, a Kenyan will tell you why, when there was a bloodbath in Kenya, where was Tanzania? Did you see us involve ourselves in your things when they were happening? So why do you now want to come and involve yourself in our things? We saw, and for clarity, we saw what happened when the Martha Karuhas were stopped to enter Tanzania. And they said, but why are you stopping us? It's a sovereign state at the end of the day, despite the fact that it's East Africa. But for me, I think it becomes hypocritical of us that when states are gagged down on certain things, we keep quiet. But then we make a lot of noise when something of our interest has been brought up. That brings me back to my first explanation. Is this democracy, or we are trying so hard to prove to the greater nation that we are practicing what you define as democracy? And for me, I think as East Africa, now is the time. The signs are showing it is ripe. We need to go back and sit down and say, do we need the East African community? If we need it, how is it going to work? I think these are conversations that the young people have been discussing over time. In the Vijana Assembly, we have been having these conversations and saying, what is the goal of the East African community if a Ugandan number plate travels to Kenya? You have every stop, they are stopping to ask you, where are you going? What are we doing? So what is the goal of the East African community? What is democracy? Because what works in Uganda might not work in Tanzania. But the pressure of having a uniform system is what is strangling us and effective leadership in our countries.
Thank you very much. We, as the Youth Roundtable, we do appreciate those insights to our discussion. I want to pick from you, my brother Mahad. Ronald. Ronald, you are Pan-African under the Federalist Youth Movement. I know there is even an East African chapter. The Honorable Lynnet poses issues of the objectives uniting you as Pan-African, because as a regional bloc, East African community is one of the agendas where Pan-Africanism is being expressed. First of all, I want to get your insights. What do you make of the state of democracy in East Africa? But also, I want to get your insights on the issue of unity in terms of portraying democracy. Has it been in unison? Because in 1963, where you celebrated the African Liberation Day, the working relationship between the late Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Dr. Milton Obote, and Uhuru Kenyatta is not the same relationship that we see today within the presidents leading the community. Exactly. What do you make of that?
Yeah, actually, I will pick from there. You see, as we celebrate the African Liberation Day, we need to account for the fact that we are totally living in a different generation. Like you have said, the relationship then, it was a relationship where Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, actually, before we got independence, he wanted the independence of East Africa as a whole. But then, of course, there are some setbacks that did not bring that to reality. But then, looking at what is happening in East Africa today, already we have a treaty, like my sister has submitted. We have an East African community which was established through a treaty. And when you read the East African Community Treaty, Article 6D, it talks of good governance through adherence to principles of democracy, rule of law, and then equal opportunities. But then when you look at what is happening apparently, you know, it is like the incense for the establishment of the East African community is just something ornamental. Like, it is not real. When you talk about rule of law, and in the Pan-African sense, when you talk about equal opportunities, we need to look ourselves as African citizens. Like it really looks awkward when Agatha Twaile goes to Tanzania and is deported, is treated like a foreigner. You look at an African being treated as a foreigner on an African land. So that takes me to the vision of the Pan-African Federalist movement, which is to mobilize and organize Africans to build a united African states. We need to build a federal, whereby we don't look at ourselves, we don't look at merely the borders, but we look at ourselves as Africans. Because one, these borders, in the first place, they compromise, they fragment our governance structures, and that makes us exactly fit in a beggar state. Because one, we are easily manipulated because our governance structures are compromised. We don't have, the strength of our bargaining power is limited because of that fragmentation. It is true that we need to respect nationalistic patriotism, but then we need to put African solidarity at the front. Because African solidarity, in the first place, gives us, makes us stronger in as far as bargaining power is concerned. But because of these borders and whatever is happening, that's why you'll see a Ugandan being frustrated in Kenya, a case of Kisuze, being abducted and then brought to without following the due process. You will see Ugandan activists and a Kenyan activist, Boniface Mwangi, being mishandled in Tanzania, simply because we lose the point, we lose track when we diminish ourselves to the borders, to the colonial borders. So the instance of establishing the East African community would actually make much sense if we appreciated and accepted that we are African citizens, whereby a Ugandan will have free access to Kenya, a Ugandan will have free access to Tanzania, and then similarly, a Kenyan or a Tanzanian will have free access to Uganda. But simply because we don't account for the African solidarity, that's why our presidents have violated, have actually gone away, have not respected the principle or the instance of establishment of the East African community. And that's why we're having bad governance. That's why we're having abductions. That's why we're having persecution, cross-border persecutions, simply because someone is not in that country. They feel they shouldn't participate in the democratic process of that particular country. And as a federalist, I really look at this as something that, first of all, diminishes our bargaining power. Secondly, it fragments our governance structures in that we are compromised, and then we are easily accessed by the colonials because the conflicts we are having. So the fragmentation of our power makes people with their own interests easily access us, and then they fuel conflict amongst us. So I think as we talk about the state of governance in East Africa, we need to look at something broad, something bigger than the cross-borders, colonial borders.
Is why we are looking at the democracy in East Africa. My brother Mahad, a meaningful democracy requires robust local government, transparent political parties, as well as engagement and institutional accountability and participation. My question here is, in the past 2 decades, all these have retreated in the region. Where do you sit as a young lawyer who has business to do in terms of the law, the next certain or the rest of your life, and assess the state of democracy in East Africa?
Okay, thank you very much. Like I was introduced before, my name is Mahad Kisuze Mugaya. With regards to that particular question, as a lawyer, I can say that it is worrying. And the reasons for that are simple. My argument is that however much states have their sovereignty, first of all, that sovereignty in international law is subject to certain like universally accepted standards when it comes to issues like human rights, when it comes to diplomatic engagements, and in very many other aspects. I think East Africa as a region, like my brother submitted, we subjected ourselves to the East African treaties as something that we subscribe to. And that East African treaty obliges all the states within the region to adhere to certain basic principles of good governance that include rule of law, that include respect for human rights, and many other things. We have the African Charter for Human and People's Rights that talks about the same principles. I think it is in Article 7, plus many other international instruments. These are instruments that states have willingly subjected themselves to. Now, what that means is that a state has to pay attention and respect the obligations that derive from those particular instruments. When you talk about those particular elements like accountability, the idea of democracy is that democracy is not universal, but it also has certain, like its manifestation is not universal, but it also has certain basic principles that however much the structure changes, for example, you cannot do away with the idea of representation of the people and you claim to have a democracy, right? So democracy also has things like respect for human rights, respect for rule of law, institutional accountability, and things like that. At a point whereby a Ugandan going to a country within the East African region, Tanzania, to attend a court session of somebody, and that person is deported without any charges being pressed against that person, and even that deportation is done in a manner that I can call arbitrary, because I think she was incommunicado for 4 days or something like that. That is way beyond the threshold of 48 hours. So even if that person was a Tanzanian citizen, you'd find that they were being held in breach of the law. But then that person is deported. And then at the end of the day, we are going to have a summit of East African heads of government that are going to discuss that we need to have more trans-border, more cross-border movements of people and goods, of professions and things like that. I think it starts from this basic minimum. If I cannot go and attend a court session of somebody in Tanzania, then what guarantee do I have that I'm going to go and get a sustainable job?
I remember the Honorable Mafakarua trying to get a practicing law.
You see? And at the end of the day, what the point I was making, what guarantee do I have that I'm going to go to Tanzania and get a job and be able to live there without and actively participate, right? Because when I go there, I'm going to automatically pay taxes and things like that. What guarantee do I then have that I'm not going to be deported at some point in time in a similar manner, right? The example you bring of the senior counsel, Martha Karua, a whole former Minister of Justice was being denied a practicing certificate. And at the end of the day, like a few months down the road, we are going to be complaining about Kenyans refusing to accept goods from the Ugandan agricultural market. I mean, from the Ugandan agricultural produce. So I think you can see that some of those basic principles, or like those basic elements, are being undermined in the current status quo. Because if you cannot allow trans-border movement within the region, then you automatically undermining the principles that we're constantly preaching day in, day out. But when you talk about the idea of democracy, I think we have, just this year alone, we are not, I don't think we've reached halfway of this year.
Tanzania is heading to an election
this year. Uganda is next year, and I think Kenya is also having one very soon. Yeah. But we are not yet I don't think we are past halfway we are past halfway this year. But I think the events from January have painted a very negative image of East Africa as a region because of what has been happening in the various states. Because when you talk about things like institutional accountability, in Uganda we are having people being tortured.
Yeah, we are chasing our golden medal.
Yes, things like we're having torture and many other things. We're having corruption, and there are some good things that are happening, but when you look at the things that are happening across the countries with regards to respect for human rights, with regards to institutional accountability, you're going to find that we are painting a very dark image of the region. It would therefore be hard to point to the fact that we are progressing in terms of having a more sustainable regional system. And I am a strong subscriber to the idea that however much states have sovereignty, there are basic principles that they have to adhere to. And at a point where we are not adhering to these certain principles, then I don't think we are painting a very good image. And it's a very worrying state for a person who is practicing law and also for an ordinary citizen.
Wow, thank you very much. I would come to the Honorable Nanyonjo Lynnet. Democracy is assessed to be fit for purpose when people have meaningful engagement with civic institutions of governance through their parties, their institutions, their workplaces, as that also determines their quality of life. Looking at the current status quo of events, as we look to the major countries, the founders of the East African community heading to an election, Tanzania has an election this year, Kenya has an election in 2027, but people are beginning to get political vehicles for that particular race. I do follow the former Vice President Gachagua. He did launch something to that effect. Coming here to Uganda, when you look at the current status, especially democratic engagement, with new laws being passed that you really see scare away a lot of people from enjoying the right of meaningful engagement. As a leader to most of us young people at the multiparty youth platform, what do you make of all this?
Well, Ivan, I have a few interesting suggestions that I want to make on that. But I want to first go back a little bit on the discussion that cropped up after my submission. Guys, I just want to stand on my word and say it's very hypocritical of us to start this conversation now and feel like, oh, we are wounded. A whole Minguna was deported from a Kenyan. A Kenyan was refused to enter Kenya. And they said, because he said Raila Odinga is the people's president. A whole Kenyan was refused to enter Kenya. And he was deported and he never went back home. And I think in the term of this new term, some of the things that the current president promised was he will return up to date. So I say it is hypocritical because where were all of us when these things were happening? Why didn't we stand up and say, no, this is wrong? It now sets a precedent for other people to do other atrocities because we have been keeping quiet for so long. According to Honorable Samia, the president of Tanzania, he says the Kenyans want to interfere in matters in internal affairs of their country. That is where the conversation of the sovereign state begins. So, if we want to be East Africans, let us be East Africans as a whole. Let it not be subjected to matters of our interest. That if an opposition leader, for instance, where is Tanzania? Where is Kenya? Where were Kenyans when Honorable Kizza Besigye was being deported from Kenya, being brought back to Uganda? Now, for one Martha to stand up and say, I am coming to the courts of law to stand as a senior counsel representative. It is a very good gesture, but this is a conversation. It becomes a conversation of interest to certain people. First of all, who is Martha Karua? Where does Martha Karua stand in the politics of Kenya? Then it sends a message to the heads of state to know, okay, this is the opposition, and how do we deal with the opposition? We should curtail them. For me, I am saying, if we are going to have a conversation, let it be a conversation that is unilateral. That when young people say that when we go in Kenya, we are not paid. when economically, if we work as expatriates in Kenya, we are not paid. For example, I gave you an example. I was among the young people that went to Tanzania for the East African Parliament, Youth Parliament. And I can tell you, if you pass on the road going from Uganda to Kenya to go to Arusha, the pain. And these are things that we submitted in the East African Parliament. And we said, guys, if we are going to discuss uniformity as East Africa, at least it could not be hard for me to move from Kenya. Do you know that up to recent, people have been paying $50 to go to Juba? Do you know that? It has just been scrapped off. So when we are having conversation, let it not be isolated to, if democracy is not isolated only to political participation, it should be a broad conversation. Then it becomes a conversation of every East African. But when it's specifically for political participation, it becomes a targeting conversation. That is why I said, when the West was clamping taxes on Tanzania over COVID restrictions, where were we as East Africa? You get the point? That the moment we centralize, we miss democracy is started to be addressed in bits and pieces, it loses sense. And then even the people that are against it have loopway to work around you. Because if a Tanzanian asks you, where were you when taxes were we were cut, aid was cut, and what was cut over COVID when we refused to adhere to the COVID standard that was set? That was human rights, that was health, that was everything that we are talking about. So me, I'm saying that conversation should not be centered to political participation alone, because democracy entails a lot of things. For example, if the economic standard of a Ugandan was at what is the economic rate what is the money tariff of Uganda to Tanzania to Kenya? If an economic state of a Ugandan youth was at part with the economic state of a Kenyan youth, a lot of things would be happening. A lot of conversations would be happening. The standard of living alone in Uganda is not the same standard of living in Kenya. So how a hungry person thinks about democracy is entirely different with how a person with a full stomach thinks about a democracy. We have seen it in Uganda alone. When the minister says, parents, start to pack food for your children in a food flask. We barely have food. How do we get a food flask? So a person that thinks like that cannot be the same, cannot think or does not look at democracy the way who is looking for food for today is thinking about democracy. When we are shouting about pads, we are finally getting some faith of saying, let us get reusable pads. People are coming, let's use reusable pads. You see a minister of state say, reusable pads are not good things to be using. We don't even have a pad. And anything that looks like health, you're saying, that shows you. So, what we look at as democracy in Uganda might not be what Tanzanians look at as democracy for them. And for me, the conversation, if we want to have a conversation, we have kept quiet about what is going on in Congo. We have kept quiet about the mass murder that was made. I think it was Congo Brazzaville that had a mass murder of young people that were said they are in treason, mania. Very many cases. Those ones were killed. And that for some reason, it is acceptable because it's the sovereignty of the state. It is acceptable. We are keeping quiet. Even the lawyers are keeping quiet. But that is human right. That is life. That is being lost. We have kept quiet about what is going on in Congo. We have kept quiet about the involvement of Rwanda. When President Kagame backed, we all scattered, hell, scatter. And then we will come here and sit down and have issues why is this happening like this? If we are going to speak, let us not be objective. We have kept quiet about minerals that are stolen. We have kept quiet about the treaties that we signed. I am telling you, I was one of the advocates of the ACDEC, the African Treaty of Democracy and Good Governance. Many of them signed, implementation failed. And we are saying, and my point here is saying, with the look of things, because political participation is proving to be a little bit tricky, can we look about the economics? Can we look at the environment? We are keeping quiet when floods are taking people. Those things do not raise activists to go and say, now we have come to Uganda in Bududa to help. Those issues, for some reason, do not rise us to speak. But when it is politics, we feel the itch, the pitch. But there are other human, I think for me, that I call more pressing human degrading things that are happening in East African countries that we can ride on, that if we strengthen our economic, if we strengthen markets, for instance, just recently, Kenya was saying our milk that is coming from Uganda, we do not want. That is one of the few things that we are exporting as a country. Meanwhile, how many goods of Kenya do we have on the Ugandan market? But those conversations did not make us rise up to say, but wait a minute. We are all saying it took truck drivers to say, if you're not allowing us to enter, we shall also not allow your trucks to what? To enter. Then the state intervened. So if we are intervening on everything as activists, as young people, if we are speaking, and these are things I have spoken, anytime I've gone to the East African Parliament, these are things I have had my voice, that wait, before we concentrate so much on the politics, because each country has its dynamics and how it runs its politics, can we first work on the things that are core to us as human beings? Then if I am economically stable, if I can travel very well, if I can go to Juba as a Uganda and not be in a state of insurgency, that anytime people can shoot me. Have we talked about the Ugandans that are killed in Juba? Over simply a Ugandan comes, starts business in Juba and they are killed. And these things are happening and we know them. That it's all over the press, but these conversations are not had. So for me, the goal should be on the things that are happening to us as a general and not specifically politics alone.
Mahad, they point a very key issue that we need to discuss democracy from other fundamental pillars of a democratic society that uplift the entire yardstick. But why I gave specific attention to politics, politics today in this entire region has been highly capitalized, with the executive centralizing the entire politics is now an issue of executive powers. They enable a capitulation of the legislature and now the judiciary to be just a flower girl and a peg boy. But looking at the approach of how our politics is trading, one of its highest trades is kidnaps. We saw some general in one of the countries even now teaches language after kidnap. But we are here calling fellow young people to have high key interest in affairs of their matters. And these spaces need to be attractive in terms of how people engage, but in terms of also how people interact. If we are still in a time when we have people being taught language in basements, kidnaps all over, because when we look at the cross-border kidnaps and abductions of a person of a stature of Kano Kizza Besigye, who has been a close tie in a presidential race, who is a figure known, but still involved. Now, what of common citizens, the Ugandans that may not have that visibility? I want you to respond to that as we go for a break.
All right. Okay. Allow me, before I respond to that, to talk about something small. The idea of separation of democracy and politics. I think that would be a dangerous road to trek, and I think that is one that always drives the topic from the main road. Reason being, it is very, actually, even in law, we are usually told this, it is very hard for you to separate law from politics from law. Reason being, it is the politics that determines every aspect, almost every aspect of life. It is very hard for you to strive for economic independence when your political landscape is one that is marred by sidelining minority opinions and many other things like abductions. The argument or some of the problems like the money that is the hardship with transborder movement of goods, of people.
These are political decisions.
Yes, these are for example, why do I have to pay the $50 to travel to Juba, right? That money can be done away with just a mere phone call if the presidents come to an agreement, right? Same thing with goods. You saw that it took when after there was some economic strife between the people between Uganda and Kenya, presidents met, and in less than a month the thing was solved. So I think politics is the starting point for everything, because it is through politics that decisions on every other aspect of life are made. It is not the other way around. It is very hard for those other aspects to thrive when the economic landscape is a dangerous one. Going back to the question of the state of politics and kidnaps and participation of the people, I think democracy, like I said, first of all, it has certain key aspects for it to thrive, and these aspects are known internationally. Democracy is not universal. There are people with different types of democracy. We have directly representative democracies, for example, where people go and debate on the laws, they vote on the laws that they want to pass. Then there's the representative, which we actually subscribe to, where MPs vote on the laws on our behalf.
You have become more authoritarian.
Yes, they debate on the laws on our behalf. Like, democracy varies in its various, in all the countries, but there are certain principles that cut across, and you cannot do away with those principles. You can just modify how you apply them. So the idea of, to that very end, the idea of participation of the people, when you're not guaranteeing something like the respect for human rights and meaningful participation, then that space automatically becomes it automatically becomes how can I call it, benchmarked for a few, or it becomes left out for a few to participate. An example, the UPDF Amendment Act was passed recently. And I think it was passed in lightning speed compared to all other laws in Uganda. We've had the marriage bill in parliament for I don't know how many years, but the UPDF Amendment Act passed in 1 week. And the idea, the participation that we're talking about, ours is more of a representative participation, like the Constitutional Court said in the petition challenging the anti-homosexuality bill. But it also acknowledged that there has to be people participation, and this happens through things like those sessions with Parliament and many other aspects. So I think to a point where you're giving a person a letter to appear before a parliamentary commission 1 hour or 30 minutes before the session, and you're telling them to come with written submissions, that is not meaningful participation, right? So I think what has been going on is that this meaningful participation has been killed, but also for the few who are courageous to make it there, the field has been made so undesirable that people now fear to go there. And I think that defeats the whole idea of democracy, because democracy points to the fact that the participation should be meaningful. And when that is defeated, then I don't think we are doing well democratically.
We are going for a short break. As we return from the break, we shall continue with issues around the democracy of East Africa as a region, but also look at Uganda as a member of the East African community. How are we doing in terms of democracy? See you after a short break.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
We do welcome you back to the Youth Roundtable on Civic Space TV. We always appreciate for when you join us for these meaningful engagements, especially around issues that are very pivotal to the young people. Always follow us on Civic Space TV on YouTube, X. Leave us any messages for response and feedback. Coming back to our topic of discussion, the state of democracy in East Africa, we have been joined by Honorable Wandukwa Simon Gyabi, which is a name I love so much because of the region I come from. Is the National Inter-Platform Chairperson for Makerere University. He's a full-time activist for the time I've known him, and he's also a student. We want to welcome you, sir, to the show. You do join us in the break, but I want to pick your insights and your perspective as an activist, as a Ugandan, as a person who is so obsessed with saying that we achieve good governance and democratic principles. What do you make of the state of democracy in East Africa as a topic in general before we dive into other matters?
Well, thank you very much, Ivan, for having me here. And for my fellow panelists here, I managed to have listened to some of these discussions here about democracy in East Africa. Well, my name is Wandukwa Simon. I am a third-year law student at Makerere University, an activist. And the topic of discussion today about democracy in East Africa, for me, it sounds in my ears as a myth, as one that a skin we cover on ourselves, maybe just to look not as bad as we would have looked in the face of the international community out there. You see, when you look at Uganda, for example, we are reduced to an event of go into a political season, do everything as a ceremony, but the end result of everything is known.
It's like a show organized by Bala.
Exactly, and we are very proud, and Ugandans out there have reached an extent of giving up on everything and saying, let us leave all to God maybe, and all we are left with is prayer. It is a little worrisome that countries like Tanzania, where we have been looking at as benchmarking or standing at a better standard, are now becoming equally as bad.
We are now in the same class but different streams.
You get so with Kenya, they also practice a little democracy here and there. But the whole East Africa, I think there is no country that beats us in our level of rot. Like we're too deep down rotten. But all these democracy, the abuse of human rights in our East African state, are normal to people. The killings are normal, that you'll disappear and people talk about you in a day or two and they forget you, that a few people who come out to talk about these things are looked at as enemies of the state. That when you, Ivan, today are picked up from this studio today, and I speak out, I am bad. I am spreading hate speech. You know, I am inciting violence. You know, and that is the modus operandi. It's normal. That we are very comfortable with how we are as an East African community, but there is need to come out and challenge the status quo. When I was following the discussion, a friend here was discussing how bad our Ugandan parliament has reached, or our leadership has reached. And I think I agree with one element which was discussed by my sister here, that we have interested leadership with very hungry mouths. People who are desperately looking for money, that they can even sell their souls to the devil just to get money. You know, when you listen to the conversations in the UPDF Amendment Act that was passed on the 14th, you realize that even as they were seated to make the report, and the whole process was not completely done, the MPs on the committee ran to State House for an NRM caucus, and the following morning came up with a report. Where was all that done from? We are sending leaders into leadership with no objective of fighting for their people. And we see these things, and when tomorrow it backfires to us, we lament. You see, when President Museveni took over power in 1986, the 10-point program, I think I have never seen a better manifesto. The 10-point program was a very brilliant manifesto. But look at the 10-point program and of Mr. Museveni and what is at stake now.
He swallowed it to fall.
You know, so it is the democracy in East Africa is a myth. The human rights abuse in East Africa is the order of the day, and I think as young people there is need to rise up. I do not subscribe to the thought that because we kept quiet then we should not come out now.
Yeah.
I think that would also be a wrong understanding or perspective to take, because as the young people, many of these things may have happened when we did not have capacity to rise up. But as young people today, there's a lot of things that we need to rise up to. Agatha was abducted in Tanzania, and she's dropped at the borders 3 days after. She's a lot of abuses on her, including rape. These are some of the things we need to rise up against. There are many other abuses out there, but as Ugandans or as East Africans, we seem to hold our hands and find it as normal status quo.
Thank you very much, Simon. Before we shift the topic, I want to conclude with the Pan-Africans here. It looks we are uniting in crime, in kidnaps, in undemocratic behaviors, in corruption. And your core objective is to see Africa unite. But when you look at what fellow panelists are discussing, the issues uniting us lately, where do you see the work that you have as a Pan-African Federalist, but also as the people who subscribe to the ideology of seeing that we open up our borders? Shall we open dirty houses for each other, or where do you see the need going forward?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Ivan. Indeed, we see our leaders unite when they're actually committing atrocities against humanity. But then it is challenging that our leaders are actually narrowing democracy to, you know, going into elections. You know, people go into the hoax elections, take the president, of which Mr. Simon has said that they go for an election when the result is already known. I think democracy in an African sense should be widened, shouldn't be narrowed to that extent. When you look at East Africa is actually a critical launch pad that would actually start, because East Africa has gotten some of the countries that first got independence. You know, when you look at the after Ghana, you can see it's 63. We're having Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. It is a critical launch pad that would spark, that would actually start, that would be at the front of establishing a federation, of establishing a united Africa. But then there is no way we can fail to have political, social and economic regional integration, and then we think we can be the starting point of a united Africa. So there is need for us to have a much deeper discussion about respect for human rights, respect for the rule of law, and then respect for the democratic principles. And this is so large to the extent that it begins with constitutionalism. Like, we have constitution, we have constitutions. You know, East African countries have gotten constitution. You can see that the constitution of Uganda has totally been deluded. And it is actually, it doesn't make sense. You know, it violates democratic principles. And then even the way policies are implemented in Uganda, it is still against the constitution. I will submit something about the UPDF Act, where it was a matter that the Supreme Court had actually rejected. It is human to try civilians in a military court, but then the parliament goes against Article 92 of the Ugandan Constitution, goes ahead to discuss a matter that is not supposed to be discussed in parliament, because, you know, the judgment by the court was actually against the decision that parliament was bent towards. So you see, in Tanzania, Tundu suggests some constitutional reforms where the president shouldn't have the mandate to choose the electoral commission. Like, you know, it doesn't make sense that someone is going to determine the person who will oversee over the elections, of which maybe people will vote against her, or, you know. So it doesn't make sense, and simply because someone is suggesting such a constitutional reforms that would be bending us towards real democracy, where people's suggestions are actually respected. You know, such a person is arrested, and up to now, Lissu is in custody because of suggesting a certain constitutional reform that would actually, you know, try to bring democracy to light. And then the abductions, I need to submit on what my sister was saying, that we shouldn't, you know, think about uniting because there is political misfits that are happening. You know, when you talk about politics, it is something broad. It determines the economy of the society. It determines, you know, it is where policies are formulated. Like, one person said that if you're not on the dinner table, then most likely will be the meal. So if at all we don't indulge in these political talks and how we unite as a region, how we integrate politically as a region, how we get democracy out of the cross-border, you know, abductions and atrocities, then it means we shall not be able to articulate on other policies that will determine how our society will lead life. We shall not be able to articulate on other economic policies that will actually make us sovereign. And then as I think as I close this, you know, East Africa is a microcosm for the African challenges. You know, if East Africa still continues the way it is, apparently, and a region of abductions, members of heads of state are collectively collaborating in abducting and trying to to suppress dissent, then I think as young people we need to really rise up strongly and condemn this, because as I have said, it is a microcosm for the challenges of Africa. It is as well a place where unification of Africa can easily start from. So we need to rise up as young people. We need to call upon these statesmen. We need to call upon citizens to rise up and call out these leaders that are actually violating the democratic principles, leaders that are not, embracing unity, but they embrace unity when it is suppressing dissent and oppressing the opposition, oppressing the other side of the book. So we need to rise up as young people. We need to, like I said, that the results of the election are most cases predetermined, but we shouldn't give up. There are there are other avenues that we can utilize. We can mobilize and organize ourselves towards trying to regain power, because what is important is regaining power, and then we can determine who to lead us and then who to be our president.
Thank you very much. That has been Kule Ronald, a Pan-African Youth Federalist. Simon, for my next question, allow me first bring you before I bring the Honorable Lynnet. The High Court of Uganda nullified the election of Honorable Imbazi Elias Nalukolo as the MP for Kawempe North. And in their verdict, the Justice Bernard Namanya, in a 50-page PDF, ordered the Electoral Commission to organize a fresh election for the Kawempe North constituency. Looking at events this year and the particular case scenario, where does this leave our democratic position ahead of the 2026 election?
Thank you. Well, about the nullification of the Kawempe election and declaring the seat vacant, Ivan, this is a matter that is still before court. So I may not discuss it in detail in the legal aspect, because the Honorable Imbazi Nalukolo has appealed to the Court of Appeal for the decision to be looked into further. But between you and I, or our viewers out there, this year we experienced the worst of what a desperate Museveni government can do to get power. You in broad daylight, people were shot at, journalists beaten brutally, ballot stuffing in broad daylight, and somehow the persons doing this come to raise concerns in court that the Honorable Imbazi Nalukolo was and his team were violent. They disrupted the election. They bribed voters. Where has the sense of shame in our country gone? Is a question that I keep asking myself. There are things that happen in this country, Ivan, and you feel like, is this the lowest we can go as a country?
They actually become diversionary to these serious issues.
But because some of the things have now really gone below belt. I looked at the nomination of Honorable Nalukolo and the abduction on the very day of the nomination. And you see, all these are on record information. There was an alarm raised to the Electoral Commission after the the abduction of the candidate on nomination day, you know, all the electoral violences that they're in throughout the entire, campaign period of the election. It was the most violent, I can say. But what should a Ugandan expect? I think first it should be, does this government even care about the democracy at this level? Or what it cares about is, do we have as many positions? It is now at a level of proving a point that I can shoot you and you'll say nothing, you don't have the power. I can rob you in broad daylight and you say nothing because you don't have the power. So it is the High Court had declared that Electoral Commission uses more taxpayers' money in Kawempe North to organize another election. The public must be worried of the kind of election that may be organized in Kawempe. It will cause more lives.
I'll pause you there. The Honorable Lynnet, Section 80 of our Constitution and 81 established the Electoral Commission of Uganda, that is into law under the Political Party and Organization Act, which has even been amended 2025. As we look at some of the grounds that always people have used to challenge elections in court, key of the issues is the conduct of the Electoral Commission. It has been accused of organizing elections of low quality, elections where it was biased and double standard in its approaches. And these are issues that, as the states, are costing taxpayers a lot of money. We are saying that we work on our economics, but if we worked on it to only pay to people who are inefficient and not effective, it will still cost us back to the position even where we are uneconomically sound. First of all, I want to get your insights about this specific scenario that the country is experiencing, giving you a leader to all young people out there. But also, secondly, what do you make of the Electoral Commission's performance ahead of 2026?
Thank you very much, Ivan. First, I want to go on record. Simon, I do not say that we should keep quiet. I am saying when we are addressing atrocities or injustices in East Africa, we should address all injustices and not pick things that we think are centered to our heart. A woman was disgraced in Rwanda for just being an opponent to President Kagame. That was an atrocity. So when we start addressing atrocities, address all. Minguna has not come back to Kenya and we are quiet about it. These are conversations that we should have in general. And lastly, I do not say that we should forget politics and address economics. But I know over the time, there are things that people have done to force the hand of politics. We can drivers that force the hand of politics. If political participation is not giving us some of the results that we want, can we try and divert the approach and put some of these drivers to get some of the low-hanging fruits for us to go ahead? And lastly, to the Pan-Africans, I'm not saying we should not unite. I'm saying if we are uniting, we should be able to iron out the things that are giving us the problems for us to unite. Because we cannot unite when it's convenient and disunite when it is not. Thank you very much. Now, for the Kawempe North, I think the Kawempe North showed itself, it presented itself that it was going to be an irregularity. I am not shocked that things are happening the way they are unfolding. For example, after the declaration of the results, the Electoral Commission said it did not have money to gazette So some of these things, we see them coming, but like I said, it's hypocritical of us that we see these things coming, we do not speak about them, and then when they are at the helm, at the bursting point, then we have conversations about them. For me, that's where my problem is. Among the amendments that we gave to the Minister of Justice as the multi-party forum, these are some of the things that we have. We have ironed out. We have said, look, 3 million alone is disfranchising youth from participation. We are saying, wait, why are we voting so many people at the same time? Then you say, because we have, study has it, that on voting MPs, a lot of people come to vote for the president and MPs. But local government, as we go further, they don't what? Show up. We are saying, why don't we vote in a certain... These are conversations that we have been having as multi-party youth platform. So for me, Kawempe North it just cements the beliefs that we have been having, the cries that we have been crying. And unfortunately, Simon, some of these things pain me. Because when we have conversations like this and we invite people like you to come and join us, so we have a formidable force, you say, now those ones are sitting with the NRM. But you need to talk to the NRM directly and tell them now, if we are going to do this as a young people, we should do it as a young people, as a whole. Because when now we were making these things, in the beginning of MYF, NUP was part of us. Along the way, they broke off. But MYF has been advocating for these things. I was an observer in that election. We wrote a whole report and said, these were the irregularities in these things. But we do not have a solid voice to say certain things. I had a candidate as a People's Progressive Party in that election. We lost. But also, in that election, I learned that a lot of people participate, not because they want to participate, but because there is an agenda inclined in their mind. That is where I said that broke politicians are bad politicians. Because by the time they go in an election, they will do anything and everything to get that seat. Because they have probably earned money to participate in that election. So even if it is illegal, they will do it to make sure they get what? A hold of that seat. But for the irregularities that are happening now, the nullifying of Kawempe North, I kind of had the feeling, I saw it coming. The problem is we did not make noise enough to prevent it from coming. Because if we had spoken, if we had joined our voices to speak and say, why would you organize an election and not have money to gazette the candidate? Why would that happen? If we had a conversation at then, some of these things, they would not have folded our hands. And I think it's high time that we stop this business. If we feel the need, the pinch, we should rise up and start speaking. And speak in a whole. Because now let me tell you, Simon, as MYF, last time we were at FDC, we were speaking things that pinch even the NRM, but they had no way to escape. And that was our assurance. When we come to speak, we come with them. If that is what it takes for us to have a voice heard, to have them along as our assurance for our safety, let us have them and speak about the things that affect the young people or the people of this country. Because the moment we say isolation, we have seen what isolation does in this country. So we have to devise other means. I was one of the people that was on the roads. I can tell you, ask Genevieve Giro. I am a foot soldier. We were the first foot soldiers. No more campaign, what? Ask anyone that, ask Nomad to be Himbise. He will tell you, we know Lynnet, that one was a foot soldier. But I did that. It did not yield for me the results that I wanted. Then I said, how do I devise ways of affecting the group that I represent? So for me, the conversation we should stop having isolated voices. We should consolidate our voices and speak about these things.
So we unite.
As the young people in Uganda, first before we go further. Because now, let me tell you, MYF has a document where we talk about all of these things. Where we even had a conversation with the EC. And we said, why does it take long for results to be announced? Why is it that all of the commissioners on the EC are appointed by the president? We even suggested that there should be a different commission that comes up with names that the way ministers are done. Probably if the president wants to suggest people that should head the EC, there should be a commission that goes through these names and says, Ivan, you're good. Simon, no. Lynnet, maybe. You know, so that we now, even these people know that they do not answer to the president alone. But the moment, sometimes you also want to play. This is me being human and having my opinion. Who wants to bite the hand that feeds them? Sometimes we also play too much as a country. Who wants to bite the hand that feeds them? And let me tell you, there are things that I know about Electoral Commission that I cannot speak about, but because I know about them, I look at them and I say, okay. That is why I say, for me, I am not shocked. It is unfortunate, it is absurd, but then I go back to the point that we should have a consolidated voice. For example, there is an act that says, in the year of election, the new act that they are working on, I think it's in the Political Party Act, where they say in the year of election, all political parties should have equal funding. And the reason why they put equal funding was to create a plain surface, an equal playing field. But over the time, government and the leading opposition have been enjoying the privileges and leaving the status quo the way it is. When people started challenging it, you see what has come out of it. It has been amended.
The platform will not be a beneficiary.
Exactly. And do you know why this is going to happen like this? It's the fact that we think other things are important than others. Yet if we had, at the time when people started rising up and saying, well, we want equal funding, we had the National Unity Platform, we had UPC, we had DP, and we had a solid voice. Some of the things that are happening now probably would have not what?
Happened.
Now, because other people shaked the status quo, they said, okay, who was not there to shake the status quo? National Youth Platform, cut them off. Now we are going to shout, but people will be saying, now me, I fold my hand. But if I had, like right now I sit here and say, we spoke about the nominations. We spoke about the selection of the commissioners of EC with full chest. And you saw it, Ivan, when we were having our address as the what? The the multiparty youth what? Platform. We said, oh, NRM, come and speak. Why is it that the youth election that is happening, that is starting on the 2nd of June, is being dilly-dalled around? Now, let me tell you, for me as a youth, now I'm speaking on the interest of the youth, I see this Nalukola scuffle as a scapegoat. Because next week, village elections start for the youth. We are going to be shouting, Nalukola, Nalukola come, Nalukola go, as NRM sneaks in, finishes the village nominations, seals the village elections. Before we know it, we have another NYC with little or no participation of opposition.
Thank you very much. I want to come to you, Mugaya. Wow, to be a good advocate name if you open up a house as Mugaya Advocates. Yeah. What do you make? I know it is an issue still in court. I know justice is for both sides. The NRA may be jubilating if at all the grounds they challenge it to them have achieved their core objective. Majority of us who are darlings of the Honorable Elias Nalukola, even before he was an MP, we really feel sorry for him. But what do you make of this particular verdict? I don't want you to go to issues that are being appealed, but going forward, where does this leave the topic of discussion today, our democracy, ahead of the 2026 election?
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, before I go into my submission, I think I need to put it to the audience that election petitions, unlike many other court matters, are unique. to an end that if we are in an election and I'm contesting against you and I lose, when I take you to court, most times I put the Electoral Commission as a second respondent, and you can lose your seat despite you having no fault, but when the fault was on the side of the Electoral Commission, and the election has to be reheld. So I think that's how unique.
So there is a partnership or a...
I'm challenging you for the seat, but then I cannot.
So in any challenge, you challenge both the candidate and the electoral
commission.
The organizer, the
Yeah.
promoter.
The organizer.
Yeah. So you can lose the seat despite you not having any fault, and it was entirely on the electoral commission.
I learned that today.
So that is how unique election petitions are. And looking at that petition, that decision from more of a legal side, I think the most important aspect of the decision, whether I agree with it or not, is that it brought to light the faults that are on the side of the Electoral Commission. One of the reasons, because in the conclusion, I saw the Land Justice put two main reasons as to why the election was nullified. And that was the first reason as to why it was nullified, because those people were denied the right to vote, which is a constitutional right. And when you look at, now that is a small election, when you look at it through a broader perspective, even when you go to the presidential election, which is actually the biggest election in the country, I think the Electoral Commission is given an ultimatum in which it has to announce results. I'm not sure how many days is it. Is it 2 or 3 days?
It's 72 hours.
72 hours, that's 3 days. So you find that there have been reports. I'm not yet sure of their authenticity. I've not yet paid attention to that, but there have been reports of results from many voting stations not being added into the final tally. And what they usually say...
The election of last year, the tally changed after 3 months, where they gazetted again. We saw the Honorable Chagulanyi's total votes and all candidates.
After they had all been added. But I think, and what the scapegoat that they usually use is that those results are no longer substantial. But then they neglect the fact that they reduce...
What do you mean? They don't affect...
That they will not change the positions of the candidates. In other words, the winner is already there. For example, they already have...
Still, it was the same case for Kawempe. After a few days, the target now came to 9,000 votes.
Yeah, but what the fault that shows you that the Electoral Commission has some limitations. Because, for example, if I know right away from the start that I have 9,000 votes, then what I'm going to be looking for is a challenge to the small... There's going to be a reduced gap. And now my mentality will not be on what is the gap is very big, but rather how do I challenge the small gap that is there? And that has a very big effect even on a presidential election. Because for a presidential election, for example, an MPI can win by 4 votes. A presidential election, I think you have to make 51%?
Yes, 50%.
Yeah, so you understand, like, there are those faults on the side of the Electoral Commission that have actually been cast to light by this decision. And that has an impact on the presidential election and all other elections that are going to be cast in the future. But also secondly, the fact that with the way how the election was handled, still on the side of the Electoral Commission, I'm going to be so much on the Electoral Commission. It has the mandate to organize election. And it does so in conjunction with other state organs like the security forces. But it reaches a point where the Electoral Commission does not have control over those agencies. Yet it is the head agency or the head institution in charge of the election. We saw what happened in Kawempe. It was jet everywhere. 2021 election, I think every polling station was like a barracks. And I'm not saying that these people should not be there, but they should be regulated in how, because their presence there and what they do there ultimately has an effect on how that election is going to play out.
Definitely.
Many people...
The army that should be there. It's the police.
Yes.
According to Electoral Commission.
Yes. In 2021, I think more than 8 million people did not vote. One of the reasons for that is that many people fear. Could they be like, somebody is going to be like, why should I leave my job to go and vote when I'm going to go there? I'm seeing the army there. There are chances that anything can happen and I can be beaten or shot at any time. So I think the fact that the Electoral Commission does not have control over the elections that it actually holds is a very, very big problem to our democracy, because like I said, democracy has certain principles. One of those principles is meaningful participation and equality. So if people are not given a chance to participate in that particular process, because democracy goes beyond just holding elections, but elections are the biggest event in terms of democracy. So at a point where people do not have meaningful participation in that, then it becomes problematic for us in a democratic sense and also in a legal sense. Lastly, on the decision, yesterday I was going through social media more so on X, and I was seeing how various lawyers were dissecting how that decision is going to play out, because the argument was that the act, the Parliamentary Elections Act or something, it has that you cannot hold a by-election if the period that is left is 6 months or less.
Yeah, that is next week on Monday.
Yeah. So, and when you look at the state of events, Council Kule has a chance to appeal, and I think they have already filed a memorandum of a notice of appeal, not yet a memorandum of appeal, notice of appeal. And when you file a notice of appeal, you're given a certain period of time within which to file your appeal. So they can choose to file that appeal on the last day. And then when that is done, there are processes that have to go on until when the decision is delivered. Now, once they file a notice of appeal, automatically, they cannot take him away from the seat. That is, there is an injunction already. You cannot take him away from the seat until the Court of Appeal renders its decision. Now, when you calculate the timeline of events, by the time the Court of Appeal renders that decision, even somebody was saying, even when it works very fast, we shall be within that period of 6 months. And so there are chances.
That is June, which is next week.
Yeah. So there are high chances that this victory was in vain. And I think that teaches us a very good lesson. I have my lecturer, it's called Dr. Kawumba, who usually used to tell us that in law, yes, law is a very big tool that you can use to achieve justice and social transformation and everything. But then even law itself, it has its limitations. You're going to reach a point whereby it's not going to yield for you what you would want. And this particular decision is actually reflecting that. Nambi might have celebrated the win, but if the events play out in that form, it is a useless win, I can say. Right?
I think for Nambi it was deliberate. They wanted it like that. That is why they even delayed gazetting him. They wanted to drag it to the period where we now go back to normal campaigns, and then
I think if I can as well interject from there, you see, the politics at play is beyond Kawempe, because there is one thing that we need to observe, is that absolute power reaches a point when it corrupts someone absolutely. Two things that I looked at from the case of Nalkola and Kawempe. One, that we are having an electoral commission which is proven like it has failed to manage the elections, because we all saw what happened there. There was no press freedom, how the press was treated, and then at that time it was the electoral commission in control, so it couldn't ably command the forces that were there, meaning that our EC, if I might say, it has hawks powers during the election period. And then the other second thing is, the decision was intended, like she has said, and that shows how power has completely corrupted, people with absolute power. There is a decision that someone intends to pass, and then that decision, one, it taints the image of the judiciary. Two, it is biased, like it has side.
I think where he's stressing an issue of the Parliamentary Elections Act, I've not read clearly the section and words, but it stipulates certain deadlines where all issues of this challenge should take. I'm being alerted by my production team that we are out of time. Would like, since we have our guest today as the chairperson of the multiparty platform, to give us our closing remarks for the show as we close.
Thank you very much. I didn't even know that I was the guest, but I want to thank all the able participants here for a very brilliant discussion. And I want to tell the young people and remind you that youth elections start next week, 2nd June, nomination at villages. You know the youth election is a college vote. Once you miss the village stage, you will not have any room to participate. And with everything that is going on, it can be easy for you to forget. But please don't forget. Go and participate. More young people. We need more young people of opposition in the National Youth Council to have an objective discussion on matters of young people in this country. Please go and participate. Do not lose hope. It is our country. It's our motherland. We have to be part of these processes in order to make the change that we strongly yearn for. I thank all of you, and hopefully we will be alive to see what the next 5 years of leadership in this country bring us. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. It has been the Youth Roundtable with our lawyer, that is Mahad Kisuze Mugaya, my brother, the Honorable Wandukwa Simon, the Pan-African social justice activist, Kule Ronald, and I remain Masawi Ivan, your host. We wish you a blessed week. See you again next week, same time, same place. Stay tuned to the Youth Roundtable show. Thank you.